1:45 a.m., August 18th, 2025. The Baltic sky, normally tense but quiet, was ripped apart by fire. Inside Russia's Kaliningrad enclave, the massive S-400 Triumph radar locked onto a single silhouette. To Russian officers, it looked like a Ukrainian jet daring to cross the wrong line. The order came fast. Fire! A 48 N6DM missile, 22 feet long, nearly 4,000 pounds of steel and fuel, erupted from its launcher. Within seconds, it roared to Mach 14, a blinding white scar tearing across the sky. The target was not Ukrainian. It was an American F-35 Ampere Lightning II. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed. The pilot yanked the stick. Flares burst. The jet dove hard. For 27 seconds, death chased him across the thin Baltic air. The missile never struck directly, but when it self-destructed 600 yards off the wing, the shock wave shredded flight surfaces. The stealth jet buckled, wounded beyond recovery. Mayday. Falcon 1 hit, Baltic waters, aircraft damaged, attempting ditch. The pilot's last calm transmission crackled across encrypted channels. At 9:47 a.m., the F-35 tilted, spiraled, and plunged toward the sea. One missile, one mistake, and Washington read it not as an accident, but as an act of war. Remember, this is a simulated scenario crafted for storytelling and learning, not an official account of real events. If you were the president, would you strike back immediately, or wait for Russia to explain? 4:15 a.m. Washington time, the Situation Room filled in minutes. The president, the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the National Security Advisor stood over a live feed of the Baltic. The Mayday from Falcon 1 was no longer a mystery. The launch origin traced back to Kaliningrad. No weather anomaly, no mis-ID. A deliberate shot. Prepare the fleet, one order, and the Atlantic lit with movement. Aboard USS Gerald R. the air wing snapped to flight quarters. Ops officers pushed a pre-built playbook across consoles. A layered strike designed for dense air defenses. The objective was precise and limited: blind, break, and paralyze Kaliningrad's command and control without striking civilian infrastructure. The window was narrow. The message would be unmistakable. The package aligned in three waves. First, 68 suicide drones lifted as the opener, each with a 200-pound precision charge and potted jammers to flood acquisition radars. Their job was not survival. Their job was to pull every search beam and missile tube in the enclave to the surface. Second, the steel. 15 F-22 Raptors and 10 F-15EX. Eagle IEs would ride the drone-created corridors, each jet carrying tailored loads. JDAMs for hardened nodes, SDBs for point defenses, AIM 122nd for anything airborne. The Raptors would cut the artery sector command posts, network relays, and long-range tracking arrays. The Eagles would clean the teeth, Pantsir sights, ammunition trucks, and mobile launchers. Third, the Hammer from the sea. 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles staged from an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer on the screen line. Their aim points were buried. Bunker entrances, power nodes, fiber trunks. If the first two waves bent the shield, Tomahawks would break the spine. E-2D Hawkeye spun up to stitch the picture. Link 16 went green across the air, wing and escorts. Tankers slid into racetrack orbits. Recovery helo crews strapped in, eyes on the sea for a shoot or a flare. Rules of engagement were read twice. Target folders were verified a third time. At 3:30 p.m. Baltic time, the strike clock would start. No speeches, no warnings. Just a measured answer. Blind the radars, crack the bunkers, cut the net. Then leave the sky quiet enough for the world to hear what happened. 3:30 p.m. Baltic time. The deck crew on Gerald R. watched the sky fill with small, hard shapes. 68 unmanned suicide drones rose in staggered ladders, their jammers already flooding the spectrum. They fanned into three prongs and pushed east, 200-pound precision charges slung beneath their wings, data links pulsing through Link 16. Inside Kaliningrad's bunkers, the first alarms merged into one continuous tone. Search radars bloomed with snow. Tracking radars bled false returns. What looked like 100 targets were, for the crucial first minutes, everywhere at once and nowhere at all. Pantsir and Buck crews kicked power to standby generators, cycling optics as their scopes washed out. The Russians fired first. 18 surface-to-air missiles leapt at corkscrew angles, contrails ripping white gouges across the haze. 12 American drones vanished in quick, harmless fireballs. One crippled airframe tumbled toward an F-22 wall and was snapped to ash by a short, surgical burst from an escorting Eagle. For a heartbeat, the battle space teetered on chaos. The swarm pressed on. 56 survivors split their formation, each prong diving on separate aim points. At 3:43 p.m., the first hits landed. A drone drove straight into an S-400 batteries engagement radar. The blast folded the array and tossed fuel bowsers into the air. A second prong stitched a fuel park with microcharges along the waterline. Pumps and hoses flashed and failed. The third prong raked a cluster of launchers, cooking off ready rounds and forcing crews to abandon revetments. Raptors dropped through the gap. In pairs, F-22 second rode the corridors the drones had opened and released 2,000-pound JDAM penetrators against hardened nodes. A sector command post, a fiber hub, a long-range tracking array. Each bomb bored through reinforced concrete before detonating at depth. Shock waves thumped through the soil. Lids and louvers leapt from their mountings. A radar dome worth hundreds of millions skinned in a single dull flash. Eagles followed to pull the teeth. F-15EX crews rolled in low. South Dakota Bs queued on rails. Small-diameter bombs walked across Pantsir revetments and ammunition trucks. Each impact a clean, precise bite. A gun line that had been chewing tracer into the haze went dark in one heartbeat. By 3:50 p.m., the swarm's attrition ticked higher. 17 drones lost in total, but the exchange was brutal and one-sided. At least 7 major air defense positions were down or burning, and the shield over western Kaliningrad showed its first real holes. The strike net tightened. Hawkeye stitched the picture. Tankers steadied in track. The radio stayed clipped and calm. Phase 1 had done its job. The sky was no longer impenetrable. It was open enough to reach for the spine. 3:51 p.m., Baltic skies. The first wave had torn seams in the shield, but Kaliningrad was not silent. Deep in hardened galleries, surviving S-300V4 and Pantsir S-1 crews snapped back online. Launch rails rose like steel fangs. In under 60 seconds, 22 surface-to-air missiles surged upward, contrails lacing the haze. The swarm scattered, the fighters could not. At 3:53 p.m., a shock bloom split the sky. An F-15EX Eagle II took a direct S-300 hit and disintegrated mid-air, a sun-bright flash followed by falling embers over gray water. Eagle down, the call cut across every net. Seconds later, an S-300 airburst raked a circling F-22. Shrapnel punched vents and tore the stealth skin. Warning lights strobed. The pilot dragged the wounded jet out to international air, smoke banding across his wake. For a breath, the battle space bent the wrong way. Gun lines spat tracer. Fresh SAM tracks curled toward the corridors the Raptors had carved. 2 more drones vanished in clean, empty fireballs. The opening was closing. Then the sea answered. At 3:58 p.m., 110 miles offshore, USS Thomas Hudner, a Burt-class destroyer riding the screen line, received target-quality coordinates for the Enclave's command spine. Vertical launch cells opened. 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles kicked, arced, and dropped to wave height, skimming at barely 100 feet and riding terrain and coastline in tight, low curves. Russian radars tried to rebuild a picture. Too many nodes were blind. Too many relays were gone. The first Tomahawk hit at 4:02 p.m., driving a 1,000-pound penetrator through a blast door and lifting a 30-ton slab into the air like paper. The second punched a sector relay bunker. Louvers and cabling fanned outward in a flat, ugly flash. A third walked a line across a hardened fuel park. Pumps jumped from foundations and folded. Hits stacked. A long-range tracking dome collapsed in on itself, a 500 million rubles erased in a single detonation. An ammunition gallery let go. Secondary explosions boiling 300 feet high and rolling black over the harbor. Radios inside the enclave dissolved into fragments, shouts, static, then nothing. By 4:07 p.m., the counterfire slackened. With the command hub split open and power nodes cut, SAM batteries lost their cues and their teeth. The shield bled, then sagged. Hawkeye stitched the new gaps. Raptors reset for the next run. The hammer had landed. The spine had cracked. 4:02 p.m. The first Tomahawk tore open the command hub. The second and third walked across relay galleries and fuel parks. Fire climbed 300 feet. Power nodes tripped off the grid. Inside hardened galleries, phones went dead and headsets filled with hiss. Batteries that had hunted by Q were suddenly blind and alone. Raptors pressed the breach. In two ship sections, they rolled onto the remaining long-range arrays, dropping 2,000-pound JDAM penetrators through reinforced lids. The bombs burrowed, paused, and then lifted entire rooms into a flat, dirty flash. An over-the-horizon tracking dish slumped backward and folded. Fiber trunks snapped like wet cord. Sector command posts that had still been whispering orders went dark mid-sentence. Eagles cleaned the teeth. F-15EX crews ran SDB ladders across Pantsir revetments and mobile launchers that had tried to shuffle in the smoke. Ammunition trucks flashed and vanished. A gun line that had clawed tracer into the haze a minute earlier was a strip of scorched concrete and sagging barrels. From the sea, the second Tomahawk sleeve arrived on time. Missiles skimmed at 100 feet, rounded the harbor breakwater, and struck the bunker mouths that fed the air defense net. One penetrator found a buried magazine. The hillside lifted. Secondary blasts rippled like a drum roll down a line of storage cells. Windows jumped 10 miles inland. Black smoke boiled out over the water and laid a shadow across the anchorage. By 4:10 p.m., the enclave's spine was split. Hawkeye's picture showed gaps where there had been walls. Surviving SAM crews fired sporadically without netted tracks. A few launches arced blind and fell long. The strike frequencies stayed clipped and calm. Node 3 cold. Relay west cold. Fuel park cold. The numbers began to form behind the fire. 2 major S-400 sites gone. Multiple S-300V4 batteries disabled or abandoned. Of the 12 radar positions that had ringed the enclave, fewer than 4 showed any coherent emission, and those on emergency power. The air picture that had been called impenetrable was 80% holes and heat. Ground reports told the rest. Convoys of trucks fled inland. Families emptied coastal blocks. Field commanders transmitted on backup handsets and got only static. Inside the ruins of a sector bunker, a casualty roster started and never finished. Among the dead were senior staff, among the missing, entire watch teams. By 4:20 p.m., the fight was functionally over. Kaliningrad's air defense network was shattered. More than 70% of its infrastructure wrecked or offline. Across the engagement, Russian losses climbed toward 4,000 killed or wounded. Damage estimates crossed $6.4 billion in radars, launchers, bunkers, and command assets erased. The carrier group turned its orbit. The radios fell quiet enough for the world to hear what happened. The shield had not bent. It had broken. The last phase would not be a duel. It would be the reckoning. By 4:30 p.m., the fire over Kaliningrad had thinned into pillars and sheets, drifting east in a slow gray march. The strike net fell quiet. What remained on the screens at Pacific Fleet and in NATO, Air Ops was not a battle picture but a damage map. Radar nodes that had once painted the Baltic like a lattice now showed as dead squares. Fiber trunks were dark. Command galleries were heat and rubble. Satellites snapped the proof within the hour. Of 12 major radar sites once guarding the enclave, only one emitted intermittently on emergency power and could not track stealth. The rest were slagged, buried, or abandoned. Ammunition parks that had taken a decade to stock erupted and guttered out. The tally hardened as crews finished their runs and tankers pulled them home. More than 70% of the air defense infrastructure destroyed or offline. A command spine torn open. Long-range tracking blinded. Russian losses climbed toward 4,000 killed or wounded across batteries, bunkers, and support echelons. Senior staff were among the dead. Convoys fled inland under smoke. Coastal blocks emptied. The price for the carrier group was real, and it was read aloud on every ready room wall. One F-15EX lost with 2 aviators. A Raptor limped home wounded. Nearly 20 drones gone to decoys, flak, and lucky shots. The console chatter that had carried the strike turned to short acknowledgments and checked silences. Names replaced call signs. Beyond the blast radius, the world reacted the way it always does when a fortress goes dark. NATO ministers moved to secure lines and de-conflict air corridors. European markets opened lower, then edged back, as shipping insurers kept Baltic lanes green. Energy futures spiked, then settled on guidance that the fight was finished, not widening. In Moscow, state channels promised a response and asked for patience. In quieter rooms, planners tore up calendars and rebuilt assumptions about how long a modern shield can hold under a layered hit. Deterrence is not a speech, it is a sequence. Drones to blind, Raptors to cut, Eagles to pull the teeth, Tomahawks to break the spine. Then nothing but whined over empty towers. When America answered, the battlefield did not change sides. It disappeared. The lesson will be debated in committees and war colleges, but the outline is already etched in smoke. Precision at scale beats mass at rest. Networks break before numbers do. And inside the machines, there are still people who choose when enough is enough. Was this the price of keeping a red line clear? Or the start of a darker cycle no one can fully control?